What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in. So today, after about 100 miles of running this setup, I want to talk about some pros and cons to running a hater pipe, otherwise known as a hood exit or hood stack in some cases. Let's jump right into it. The first major pro of having a hater pipe, at least from the knowledge base that I have, it will make the most power. The reason why is it's the least amount of back pressure after the turbo while still having a heat sink. So if you're wondering, well, if I can make the most power without having anything after the turbo, why would I not just run nothing after the turbine housing? And the reason for that is the same reason that you wouldn't run a engine with no exhaust header, because you'll burn up the valves. The same thing applies to the hot side of a turbocharger. All of that heat needs something to absorb into and dissipate into besides the turbine wheel. So I could easily overheat a turbine wheel if I don't have anything after it. And then something that people don't often talk about, but is something to potentially consider, is the Venturi Effect. So I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with the Venturi Effect, but I'll describe it just in case you're not. So if you have air passing across the surface of the pipe at a pretty straight angle, like you would experience while driving quickly, that will actually create a suction inside the pipe. So you're reducing back pressure further by having air running across the top of the pipe. How much that affects anything, I don't know, but it is something to keep in mind. Another pro, it is the easiest to install. It's extremely simple. Mine doesn't have any additional brackets or anything. It just has one band clamp that gets it to the hot side of the turbo. Super, super simple. And another piece to consider, it's the least amount of weight, not only that's being added to the car, but that's being added to the exhaust manifold, which reduces cracking. So even though your downpipe may be supported somewhere else, like on the transmission, when the exhaust heats up, if you don't have the proper amount of flex in your mounts, you could potentially be creating like a cantilever action, like the hot exhaust manifold expands, but your bracket that's holding your downpipe is preventing it from moving. So that can create cracks in lots of places. It can create cracks in your downpipe, it can create cracks in your exhaust manifold, it could even potentially pull the flange off. Like a lot of bad things can happen with a poorly set up downpipe. But a hater pipe, or an up pipe, that's another name for them, that reduces any risk of that. A hater pipe is also the cheapest. It's the least amount of material, it's super easy to make, you can do it at home. Even if you're not going to run this option permanently, it will make it so that you can drive the car to multiple exhaust shops to get quotes, versus you're stuck towing it there, which if you have your own trailer, that's fine, but it's eating up more of your time loading and unloading the car. And if you have to have it towed by someone else, it's going to cost you money to get to the shop. So the shop knows that they can charge you more versus if you can drive the car there. So that's nice also. Another one of my favorite things about a hater pipe, it's a quick reference for when you're tuning. So since the exhaust is right where I can see it, I will know if I'm rich, if I'm burning oil, if I'm burning water, if my turbo seals are starting to go bad. I can tell all of that just by looking at the exhaust. When you're in boost, you can just look at it and know that this is a clean pull. There's nothing crazy going on. So let's get to some cons. So the first one and the biggest one is carbon monoxide. You're always going to have that risk. The level of severity is obviously going to depend on the aerodynamics of the vehicle, the angle at which you can run the pipe, a lot of different things. For example, a lot of Honda guys will run hater pipes, and I think it's because the way that their hoods are shaped and the way that air travels over the car, it kind of carries all the fumes up and over. But if you have something with the aerodynamics of a brick like I do, you may have some pretty serious fumes. Any way you slice it, it is a safety concern for you and your passenger. So that's the big con. Another one is if you want to have a hood when you're driving around, obviously you're going to have to cut at least one hole, potentially more, depending on how your wastegate is set up. If you're driving a vehicle where your hood is NLA, or your hood is very expensive to replace, or if your hood is difficult to weld, or if you don't have a welder, that's something to keep in mind. It could potentially be a pretty permanent thing that you're doing. Another downside, with a hood exit, you can't really be a sleeper anymore. People are going to look at the car and they're going to know that there's something pretty serious under the hood. Another con is this may be a completely illegal setup. And in addition to that, it's going to draw more attention from police. And the last con that I have listed here is soot. Especially if you're running a hood stack on a diesel, you're going to get soot everywhere. And even though, this vehicle runs on gasoline, I still have soot everywhere. This is only, 100 miles. And granted, while I was first getting it tuned, I didn't have it perfectly set up, but there is soot absolutely everywhere. All right, so with the concrete pros and cons out of the way, I just want to talk about some subjective stuff real quick. One of the first things to talk about, this setup is really dramatic and exciting. It's really, really fun. It shoots, flames right in front of the passenger's face. You can hear the turbine clear as day. It's really, really an exciting, dramatic race car setup. It's very, very fun. To go along with that, there's the looks as well. In my opinion, it's a pretty iconic style. Obviously not with mine because mine is ugly, but I see some pretty awesome setups out there with titanium exit plates with gold rivets and just really, really cool looking stuff. Again, the looks are a subjective thing. I think they look pretty spectacular and they're very exciting. Another thing to talk about is noise. Now, depending on packaging, you may actually be able to get a muffler in there. And let me show you what I've got going on. There's the hot side of the turbo, obviously. Got a V-band. And then this is actually a small bullet muffler. It doesn't have any baffles or anything like that. And then I have an elbow, wideband to the exit. So you may not be able to fit this under your hood. I saw that there was room, so I went for it, and I'm glad that I did. Really, the noise isn't going to be as bad as you think, unless you have an NA car, in which case your ears are going to bleed. So now that we've gone through the pros and the cons and some subjective stuff, now I just want to talk about my opinion real quick. So you can probably tell, since I didn't end up cutting my hood, but I won't be sticking with this setup long term. Strictly because I've decided it's just not worth it to expose my passengers to carbon monoxide, especially on longer trips, which I like to take in this car. And I really made the final decision by borrowing a carbon monoxide detector from my house and driving around with it in the passenger seat. Needless to say, it went off a lot. I would suggest to anyone running a hater pipe to run the same test before they decide to keep it. Now, could I somehow improve the design to reduce the risk of poisoning? Yeah, probably. I could extend the pipe, I could rotate it a little bit so that it moves more over the top of the car, but then it'll just get sucked in the sunroof. It's all about the aerodynamics of your car, but at the end of the day, you have an exhaust component that's exiting ahead of the passenger compartment, and safety was the deciding factor. As much as I love this setup, and I think it's really, really cool and just a blast, I can't justify it. It's like the old saying, you can't have everything, which is why eventually I want to compromise by building my own twin scroll setup and having dual wastegates that exit out the hood and then running a downpipe and then a side pipe behind the passenger compartment. I think that would get me at least a little bit of the same excitement and drama that this setup provides, but obviously since it's just when the wastegates are open, I think it would be a lot safer. Anyways, if you're running a hood exit or a hater pipe or a hood stack or whatever you want to call it, and you think I missed anything, or if you think I'm wrong about any of my points, just let me know in the comments. I don't claim to be expert authority, and this channel is all about learning stuff. Please subscribe to the channel. Thank you, my 50 subscribers. That's a pretty cool milestone. Cool that the channel's growing a little bit. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.